no matter like.
What's best for the client, what happens if they say they'll pay you 1.5%? And then you do all negotiation and they're like, you're gonna do it for 1.5% at that point? I mean, that's what's best for the client.
Yeah,
I'm not doing that. I mean, I don't wanna do that.
I don't wanna do it either.
We'll be out there.
Yeah,
Right, but I don't wanna do it either, but I feel like at that point, we have to do it, like, and the client wants that house. What do we say? Sorry, you're not gonna, you can't buy that house? I mean,
Well, isn't it just like they can't afford it? Cause they can't afford it.
Correct.
'Cause they can't afford it.
oh, I like that.
Correct.
Yeah,
Just,
Everybody's got their own business.
just wait out the process. I
Okay.
promise lenders are gonna start covering it.
Yes.
I don't know when, but they're gonna start doing it.
okay,
They're not, once lenders start losing money. Because their buyers can't afford to pay the buyer agent commission, that's gonna change really fast. So it'll end up being called like concessions, like all of it will be concessions wrapped up into one. But for now, and we'll cover purchase agreement, the purchase agreement actually breaks it out now. So, okay. I did the BEAC one first because I knew we were gonna have the most questions, but all right, what was added? Buyer or any other person acting on the buyer's behalf acquires real property or interest in during the term of this contract or any renewal, any extension, and ultimately completed after the termination of the contract. Buyer or any other person acting on their behalf acquires real property or interest which was disclosed to buyer by the broker during the term of this contract or within X amount of days after the termination, provided, however, this extension clause shall not apply if this exclusive agency contract terminates and the buyer is represented exclusively by another licensed broker. So the key in that is, in the last part of that, is that the exclusive agency contract is terminated from their previous, with the previous buyer agent. Okay. I highlighted that, but I feel like that was already in there, may not have been. Okay. And then in acknowledgements, limited agency authorization, buyer acknowledges that the limited agency authorization has been read, understood. Buyer understands that it does not have to consent to licensee acting as a limited agent, and then check up the appropriate box. There, of course, would be a limited agency authorization form as well.
so I'm a little confused. So limited agency, you won't know when they're signing this, whether or not the deal's gonna be a limited agency or not, or am I missing it?
Correct. But they're giving consent up front, whether or not they're okay.
Oh, got it.
If they're okay with that, if we want to pursue that.
Okay, got it.
Um,
Okay, that makes sense.
I didn't know it was such a big deal. But apparently buyers were not aware that they could consent to that
So
or not.
explain what limited agency is.
Yeah.
And then say there's a possibility that I'll have a listing coming up that might work out for you. Would you be okay if I represented you and my son?
Correct.
and then even though it's on here, should we still get the limited agency document signed as well?
Yes. Because this is terminology built into one form. We want the actual form that states everything to be signed. So,
This is on the purchase agreement.
and it's also, I mean, it's very redundant.
Yeah. Yeah, they kind of already know when you're writing the offer,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, you're like, okay, here, limited agency again,
Yeah.
slide it across.
I'm also representing the seller.
Just making sure you all know, because I think that there's an expectation that that may happen more now that sellers, listing agents are representing both sides or are put into a situation because the buyer who's talked with buyer agents and realized they have to pay their buyer agent are now thinking, because we already had it before, right? They went to the sellers before,
Right.
straight to the listing agent because I can cut out my buyer agent and
Yep.
they're gonna give me 3% discount. That's the thought.
Yeah.
And we have builders say that maybe,
Yeah.
so.
Are we gonna go over, if we are a listing agent, somebody does approach us, they want to write an offer, they're not allowed to use our documents, are we gonna go over that?
We can't,
What kind of document do they?
they need
use,
to,
or how do they do that?
they can write it on a napkin.
Okay.
What? Was that?
So if you're listing a house for sale, you have an open house. Customer comes through, they start talking to you, really love the house, I wanna make an offer, do you have an agent? No. Would you like me to represent you? No. Okay, so, but I still wanna make an offer on this house. They need to contact an attorney for representation, and that attorney can write up a purchase agreement. Or they can write up an agreement on their own, on their computer, and email it to you, it's still an offer. It's signed by them.
Okay.
And then we present the offer, and should your seller accept it going forward, you can use IAR forms.
You can help the buyer you're not
Yes.
representing fill out okay.
So they don't fill out a buyer agency agreement, they don't fill out a purchase agreement if it says IAR.
Okay.
Unless you represent them.
So if they say, yes, I'd like you to represent me, then they,
Then you would draw up the purchase agreement
and
as
then
the agent,
they're responsible to pay you.
correct?
Yes,
So you'd have to have that buyer agency agreement with them as well.
okay. So if your seller is paying you 6%. And you're going to represent them. You're just then,
It's like, it.
You're gonna see the listing contract changed. It doesn't say, it doesn't say like the total would be 6% and then our cooperating percentage is 3% with brokers, right? Buyer brokers.
Got
It doesn't split that out like that. You're gonna see it's very specific. It'll say this percentage to my listing agent, this percentage to a buyer broker agent if they come with a buyer, like they know it's broken out now. We'll cover that. Okay. I mean, think of all the questions you guys have asked, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you here, and some of you online, how many agents of ours does not know these things?
Oh, my gosh.
And then not only our own, think about all of the other brokerages. Cause we weren't prepared for these changes, like it happened. Like I found out the 29th. Oh, guess I knew changes were
Right before
coming.
vacation, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you panicked, Lee's
Yeah,
Blair?
Because July first, I was trying to do stuff. I was literally writing contracts. July first, nothing was working and I was freaking out.
So
but
I
then-
just, so I got this buyer who was like, very, like, she has to read everything, understand it.
Mhm.
So anything she has to sign, I have to give her beforehand.
Yeah.
So she can, because she will literally look up every word that maybe she doesn't,
You know, I got 2 of those.
so I have to give her this
Yeah.
new one that
Oh.
I just filled out before we did
Yeah.
this class, obviously, and these changes, and I'm going, trying to, you know what I mean, like,
Yeah,
understand it before I give it to her and have to, you know,
We
go
had one
over
for
it
2
and
months
then,
ago, do we have to replace it with this?
that's good.
yep. If you have signed documents prior to July 1st, you do not need to have them sign new ones.
Ooh, even if I
If
have
it's a-
signed by the buyer, but not you yet.
Then nobody heard that, because nobody does that. Nobody does that ever. What are you talking about? January, what? Did I miss this? Yeah. So if that's the case, then have them sign a new.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think I'd have my seller sign a new listing contract, even though the listing contract changed. But they're gonna see the dates. What I would do is just disclose, hey, by the way, there are new form changes. I can go over the form changes with you that you've already signed. So that you're aware going forward what we're seeing, and if you would prefer, we can sign a new, whatever that contract is, but. I don't want to reintroduce trying to redo listing contracts. Right.
Is it appropriate to say, I'm charging 3%, but if they offer 2.5%, I will take it? Should you just not even say that?
I would have that verbal conversation.
Yeah.
But let them know, because the contract reads, if I'm putting in 3%. right now, the way this reads is that's what you're obligated to do, but let's test the market. Let's see what we find out there. Because very likely the seller's probably offering a commission, so, but in the event they're not, this is the scenarios, and I would talk to them about, you know, sometimes the sellers aren't offering as much as what my commission rate is, and we have to negotiate those terms with them. So as long as you're talking it out, it'll be helpful. All right, mutual release from buyer tenant exclusive agency contract. So they added the word tenant, they added company to broker company. However, it's agreed that if the buyer purchases, options, leases, or exchanges any property procured in whole or in part by the efforts of the buyer broker within X amount of days after termination of the tenant exclusive agency contract. What am I doing now?
Sorry.
So within X amount of days of termination of the buyer tenant exclusive agency contract, broker shall be entitled to the commission established in that contract. However, the provision shall not apply if the contract is released and the buyer is contracted exclusively with another licensed broker. So that verbiage is very similar to the listing contract, right? Like if we mutually release from the listing contract, whether it's withdraw or cancel, it doesn't move forward if the contract was released or expired and that client has a new representation, new agent.
Question, because on the BEAC, it has like where we can put a specific amount of days. So I
Yeah.
put 45. So does that null and void that then? When we mutual release, does it null and void that? Or does that stay in effect?
It would null and void it if they have representation with another agent.
So what's the point of putting it?
Right.
What? No.
No, I mean, no, I didn't make the form, but I agree.
Okay.
They can decide to represent themselves, I guess, you know, and go back to something that you
Yeah.
showed them.
Did you hear that?
No, I'm
Brittany?
sorry.
So go ahead, Jen.
So if they decide you mutual release, but they decide to represent themselves and go back to a house that you've already showed them. So they're not under contract again with another agent, you would, in that case, still have the legal right to go back on them for the commission.
Gotcha. But most people aren't doing that if they use the agent in the first place. So I thought that was actually covering you. So it's really not. Even that mutual release isn't covering you if you put 30 or 45 days there and then they go and sign it with someone else, then you might as well have just left it blank, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you don't want to leave it blank, but
Well, I
yeah,
mean, I'm saying,
yeah, it's right. I mean, I think it's to protect you in the event that the client tries to circumvent you and go straight to the listing agent and the seller. Because they do that. And normally we don't find out until a neighbor tells us or somebody's like, hey, I just saw that house sold.
gotcha. Okay.
That doesn't now, Brittany, that doesn't change things in the event that, I mean, maybe you had shown the home, maybe you had put in an offer, a purchase offer on behalf of theirs and it wasn't accepted, that you did all the work you needed to do. And then all of a sudden they want to mutually release and they go straight back to the seller. You do have, you would have a case for compensation then.
And this would have to be them going back to the seller, representing themselves. So they would have to go get a lawyer and get things drawn up or drawn on a napkin. So it would be in that case. It couldn't be the list agent now taking them on as a client. Is
Correct.
that okay? Thank you.
So I had that situation happen last year where at closing, the buyer blew up, walked out, refused to close on the property. It took us 2 weeks to even get them to mutually release. I found out 2 weeks after that, they went back to the listing agent as the buyer and put an offer in for the exact same amount, less the commission rate, and it was accepted. So in that event, we have we had a right to the commission,
And then,
even though we had mutually released them.
because in that, it says like 180 days or something of that, yeah, that covers that.
Oh my gosh, did you go back on it?
Huh?
Did you go back and?
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, we won in court.
oh, good, because that's,
Yeah, that was substantial. Shady agents. Okay, so there's an addendum and amendment to buyer exclusive agency contract. The only changes on those two forms was the word tenant was added. Okay. We're actually not doing too bad on time. Okay, so the next one is purchase agreement. At the bottom, I wanted to make sure that you guys know, when you're starting new documentation, that you have the correct forms. So make sure that you're looking at the bottom of.
Literally, you guys, are you fucking kidding me?
What was it?
Adriana, I muted.
No, please unmute it for.
We're about to hear some whooping.
Love it. I am so terrified of Zoom for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Like at home, I'm like,
We're
okay.
struggling over here, sorry, everybody.
I'm about to backhand you. Get out of here. Shoes thrown across the room. All right, so make sure that not only you're using the correct forms, but your counterparts are using them as well. So you're gonna find purchase agreements dated 2024, but not July 2024. There's a huge difference in that. So make sure we're checking that, because that's what I'm looking for as well.
Since these are all new, and as people are sending them to, are you going through them real
Yes.
carefully so
Yes.
that we,
Yes.
not.
And I'm not being mean about it. I'm just like, all right, what I've been doing is taking pictures, texting the agent. This is what we're missing, or
Yeah.
this is what I need you to change,
Yeah.
please. I went ahead and signed it. Like, I don't want that to stop the process, because I know what it's like. To have to go back to the client and be like, yeah, I need you to sign this one now, because I
Okay.
did, you know what I mean?
Yes,
So I want to make sure that, moving through things smoothly, but
can you blow that up just a little
Yep.
bit?
because I don't want to hold up the process. I mean, ultimately, you would want them to sign the right document, but going forward.
And hopefully,
Yeah, so you've got me on the front end, you got yourself first, then you got me right in the middle, and then you've got our compliance team with Aliana on the back end of things. And then if you've got a TC,
mhm.
your TCs will help you, assist you with those things as well if you ask them. Okay, so what was added to the purchase agreement? Seller concession. So I love this now. So seller shall provide. Remember, there was just this like big, long 2 lines and you're like, except for, so seller concessions, dollars to be used by buyer toward any lender allowed closing costs. Now, what's interesting, what it doesn't say is prepaids or title or, so, I don't know that I like that they use specifically a lender allowed close. Well, no, I guess it would, they're not lender fees only, it's allowable by the lender, so that would in turn.
As I say, because I think I was
Cover.
always put in all, allowed expenses. or
Allowed,
something like
so that's what that
So,
is,
yeah.
okay. So we've got that, and then we have buyer broker compensation. And this says attach addendum to purchase agreement, buyer request for seller to pay broker compensation. So there is a new form, which is called addendum to purchase agreement. So just like the addendum purchase agreement for exclusive right to purchase. Our first right contingency, sorry. So this is a new form. And I'll show it to you here shortly. All right, so. If the seller or if the buyer is requesting through the purchase agreement for the buyer or for the seller to pay them, pay their agent commission, you have to put it on that attached form and that addendum and attach it with the purchase agreement when you send it over.
Okay, so,
That's it. Yeah,
so either way, so they, even if they're not offering. And you are asking them to, you would still
I would still do it.
click that,
Yeah.
and that's how you ask for it through the purchase. agreement.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so this is addendum to purchase agreement. So they did this so that we didn't have to, under further conditions of the purchase agreement, try to remember the verbiage that the state approved. So this form will do that for you. Buyers entered into a buyer exclusive agency contract with the buyer's broker. Pursuant to that contract, buyer is obligated to pay the broker a percentage of the purchase price or a dollar amount. Buyer hereby requests that the seller pays buyer's monetary obligation to buyer broker in the amount of, and that's pursuant to the buyer exclusive agency contract. You know, it's wrong, that should say buyer tenant exclusive agency contract. But I'm not gonna say. I don't need more changes. So, all right, does that make sense to everybody?
Lee, do you mind if I ask you a question about the agreement, not the purchase agreement, but the other one, because I'm looking through it.
Yeah, here, let me say this real quick. So you do not have to send over in advance with the purchase agreement, your broker or your buyer exclusive agency contract with your buyer. If the seller does request that, you can send it over. But it's not required now to do it up front because this addendum that's signed by the buyer states that. So,
I probably have been seeing this attached to, additional documents, with the seller's disclosure.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I've seen this a couple times in the documents.
it's smart.
Okay,
Yeah,
like, and that's on the MLS and the
Yeah.
documents, we're allowed to put that in there?
They can't,
See?
no, you can't do that.
I was gonna say, oh, wait a minute, I just like.
It's just eliminated.
I know, I was like, oh, wait, no, you can't do that. They can't
No,
do
I
that.
haven't.
interesting. Because I've seen a couple of them
Yeah,
have that in there.
if you know those agents, I would say something to them.
Yeah.
Like that's circumventing the MO, you can't do it like that. They're so adamant about that,
Yeah,
that you can't upload documents. It's a smart way, but
okay,
I mean, there's some agents, not KW, that online have admitted they're looking for loopholes and they're gonna try everything they can to get out of it. I mean,
Wow.
try everything they can to get out of doing
to
this.
having to do these kinds of things, yeah.
Okay, can I ask my question real quick?
Yes,
Okay, so on that agreement, I've got one pulled up, I'm actually trying to just fill one out as we went, In the C section, it says description, property, address, location, price range, whatever. What would be a recommendation to put in there? That's my first question. Second question is where it says further conditions, what would be a recommendation for there or an example of something that you would put in there?
Are you talking about the BE things?
Yeah,
yeah,
So further conditions, I always put my transaction fee. And I put on there,
like what
the
you put on.
KW admin fee, because that's what I call it when
Yeah.
I, with the title company. Whatever, to be paid by buyer at closing.
Okay. That would be a further
That's-
conditions.
Yeah.
On the C, the section C, where it says description, are most people just leaving that blank so that, or what would we be putting in there?
so, if you have a buyer that's come to you and they want to see a house, you have a discussion about this agency contract and they're like, I don't want to sign a contract with you for 6 months or a year, or whatever it is you're asking me to. You can say, okay, well, I'm not able, don't say I'm not able to, say real estate agents, licensed agents are not allowed to show customers or clients a home without an agency contract,
Okay,
right?
Mhm.
So if it's okay with you, then why don't we just do this agency contract for this one specific address?
Okay.
For this home only.
Mhm.
Should we pursue something with this home going forward? We'll have that discussion about how to compensate, but that's what this states,
Okay.
so we can do it one time.
if they're willing to do a 6-month contract, we can just leave this blank.
You can leave it blank. I mean, this is not gonna be something that's going to court. Like, nobody's gonna take us or anybody to go into court over a property address location.
Okay.
But it will help you establish where we're looking at. But if it's in general terms, I mean, if it's in Northeast Indiana, you don't have to be
Okay,
that specific. It's not gonna get you in trouble.
Usually put like, cause you kind of go over with your buyer, like what they're looking for, what's important.
Mhm.
So the things, cause I always ask them, what are the must-haves? Like, I'm not buying a house unless it has, a attached garage. So like the must-haves is what I usually put in there.
and the description for this,
I-
so then are you bound by contract for that, just that?
No,
No, okay, okay. Thank you.
No, but it kind of helps reiterate, like,
Can I ask?
that we made a bigger connection.
I had a buyer this weekend and I did for one property, but now they wanna go look at another property, so do I have to sign, do another?
you could do an amendment. You could do an amendment to that. So
Just put that specific property at the end, cause I don't know how long I made the contract, for. Does it matter? I don't remember what it did, I did like 30 days for that.
well, if you had dated it more for longer than the time frame that it took you to show the house, then you don't need to do anything different unless that client was only looking at that house and that house.
So, but I could get that done for the next house they wanna look at.
You can do an addendum to add it, or you can do a brand new. So if that agency contract was specific to a property, you're better off writing a new agency contract, but I would try to this time broaden it. So that way you don't have to.
Well, they specifically asked for.
They all to do only that house. Okay, well, as long as they're okay signing new documents every time, then I would continue to do that. That makes them comfortable, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All good questions and input. All right, let's look at listing contract.
While you're going there, Lee, if I did not do that new form, but I put it on the addendum, is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay. Because I didn't know there was a new form. I knew there was a new place in the purchase agreement. So I was like, oh, maybe we're just putting it here. So thank you.
they weren't very clear when they rolled this stuff out, so, yeah, it's a good question. All right, Billy, did you have a question? Hold on, you're on mute. I had this problem myself yesterday.
It's Karen. Let's just get right into it.
All right. Line 77 of page 2 in the purchase agreement.
I just got it unmuted, I think.
You did.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so do we have to have both the line 77, that addendum, as well as the broker compensation? Because other agents are saying, from like Horizon, for instance, they're saying they call the legal line, not both are required, it's one or the other.
Yeah, so it depends on the situation, but there's a specific situation. That's why I wanted to read that, your paperwork.
Okay,
On
I'll
that.
send it to you.
Okay, on that particular thing, because if the scenario is if, and it's gonna make much more sense when we hit this listing contract, I promise, but, if you call up as a buyer agent, you call the listing agent, say, hey, is the seller offering buyer agent compensation? And they say, yes. There's a scenario that if it's less than what, you have on your buyer agency contract with your buyer, there's a process and what you need to do with that. So that's why I wanted to read that paperwork, because it could be just one or the other, Billy. But if the seller is offering it, but not the full amount, you have a broker compensation agreement that's signed between brokerages, because that was established through the listing contract. The difference in what the listing contract states and what your contract states with your buyer, that difference is what your buyer asks the seller to cover. So there's some non-KW people on here, so I'm gonna use 3% as an example, right? Like, I'm not saying that's what we have to charge, but let's say that you have 3% on your contract with your buyer, and you call the listing agent and they say the seller is gonna cover 2.5%. I'm still gonna ask buyer's still gonna ask the seller to cover 0.5%. They've already, so the seller agreed with the listing brokerage to pay a buyer broker commission. And that's separated in the listing contract now, so we know that specifically. So if there's a difference, that's what the buyer's asking the seller to pay. And you'll see in verbiage, it's very clear that the broker compensation agreement is used when the seller already agreed to pay a commission upfront. If they didn't, and they said 0, then the buyer's gonna ask the seller to pay the broker the compensation, not the listing brokerage. So where before, the seller paid all of the commission to the listing brokerage,
Yes.
and the listing brokerage then, because they were cooperating with brokers, buyer brokers, we then paid a percentage of that out to that buyer agent broker. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
The listing contract was, so let's say if it was 6%, right? There was a time where you could make all 6%. Our brokerage could make all 6% if there was a buyer that came, they weren't represented by an agent in our MLS, first of all, but that's a long story. All right. So now instead of the seller paying Keller Williams 6% and Keller Williams splitting it out with the title company paying 3 and 3, if that's what we did per listing contract. Now the listing contract states in this example, 3% would go to the listing brokerage. And in my example, 3% then goes to the buyer broker agent. It splits it out here for us.
I think in answer to her question, for both of those being marked in the purchase agreement, if you call the broker and they're offering 3%, you would only need that one mark.
Correct,
You wouldn't have to mark both.
correct.
It's only gonna be if they're not offering and you're trying to get the difference.
Get the difference.
Or all of,
Yes.
yeah, 3% or maybe.
If your
0.5%,
BEAC
yeah.
says 3%, what Jennifer's saying, your BEAC agreement is 3%, and you call up the listing.
Sorry, I'm at my
agent.
office. It's so loud here.
Yeah. So you guys want to get 55.
Where was I? So,
That second.
yeah,
check
so
mark.
if your BEAC was 3% with your buyer, you call the listing agent, the listing agent says, yeah, terrific news, seller is gonna cover 3% on this transaction. You go, okay, great. All you need is the broker compensation agreement,
And then just that one check,
just the one check.
because I think what she's saying is Verizon is saying, people are checking both.
Yes,
And they're saying you don't need both, but
Yes.
you will if you're asking for.
for the difference.
Addition, yeah, a difference.
Additional, there it is. Yeah, if you're asking for additional commission to cover what was written in the BEAC,
You definitely have to have both boxes.
you have to have both boxes covered.
So can I leave that box unchecked on line 77 of the purchase agreement?
Because is the seller covering all of your BEAC or all your commission?
Yes.
They are. So yes, you would only check mark. You wouldn't check mark that.
Okay,
So-
so
Okay, so the purchase agreement is between the buyer and the seller. Right?
correct.
Correct. So if the seller in their agreement with the listing agent was gonna pay 3%, your buyer is not gonna ask them to cover the 3% because it was already established. But the way we establish it is through the broker compensation agreement.
So I do need that one.
You do need the broker compensation agreement, yes.
Okay.
Because,
Okay, it's
because the
clicking.
listing broker is covering a part or all of the commission that your buyer agreed to.
Well, we should actually do that.
You're gonna have to write this stuff down and say it over and over and over. Like I went on vacation and I completely forgot most of this, so.
I'm gonna have to, like, as I do it, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
just keep doing it, I don't know, I'm getting ready to send one right now. I just hit the send button. So. There it goes.
Yeah, all very, very good questions. Okay, so we're looking at the listing contract. So what was added under the listing contract? This is what I was talking about, that it splits it out for us. All right, so listing broker compensation, 1A, seller shall pay in cash in US dollars to listing broker company for services performed by the listing broker, a commission as follows. So where you normally would have put on the listing contract, if we're using 6% as an example, right? And we as a practice, you as an agent like to split that 3 and 3, right? So we would have put in on line 88 on A, we normally would have put 6%. And then in the old form, there would have been a line down underneath, same page, that would have split it out and 3% going to a cooperating buyer broker. So the list, this now will split it out. So 1A is the listing broker compensation. If there's any amount in this section, you will need a broker compensation agreement signed by me and the buyer agent broker. Everybody here sighed, so I don't know if everybody online just did that too.
Yes.
Yes. So this is the listing contract for improved property. Under 1A, under that section, that is the commission that you as an agent will charge your seller.
What line item is that?
88.
88. 88, okay.
I signed a listing contract on July 1st, and it was the old contract.
Are they offering 3%? Are they offering cooperating commission?
Yeah,
Then that's fine,
okay,
because it still breaks it out.
So that's still where the 6% goes on letter
No.
A?
No, so A would be what you charge you only. Not what we would have charged to include the compensation for a buyer broker.
Oh,
So, yeah, so now it would be a total of, so line 88, whether it's A or line 89, whether it's a percentage or a dollar amount, that plus whatever is put in 1B equals the total that the seller shall pay in cash to both brokers. So 1C is total compensation to be paid by seller at closing.
So you're gonna end up with both sides.
Yes, so 1C says compensation to be paid by seller at closing shall be equal to the sum of the listing broker compensation from paragraph A plus the buyer broker compensation from paragraph 1B.
oh,
So where before we would have put 6% on A. And then in the listing contract, it explained to the seller that we as cooperating brokers offered X percent to that other broker. So in the old form, it would take 6% and then break it out 3. So in this one, I love this because it's very specific. I'm gonna pay my listing agent this amount. And because I want as many buyers to come as I can, I'm gonna also pay 3% or X amount percent on the buyer broker compensation. So again, if you're a buyer's agent and you have a buyer who says, I want to see this house, and you call the listing agent says, my seller is offering X amount or X percent. Then you need to have a buyer broker compensation form signed with that percentage. It would be signed by me and by the other brokerage. The buyers and the sellers don't actually sign that document. It is an agreement between the brokerages. And
Do you send that with the purchase agreement?
I would.
Yeah.
Mhm. Just to make life easier on everybody,
So
but
that's another whole document.
yeah.
Yeah.
Rocky nearly passed out last night when we were having this conversation.
Not you too. I'm like,
He's like, what? What?
I'm bringing too, a little bit, it's okay.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. It's better than working in an RV factory. You gotta say it. Better than working in an RV factory.
Okay, so you say, but Lee, what if my seller doesn't want to pay a buyer broker compensation? Then these would be zeros. It would not be applicable because you're not signing it, but on line 105, under this listing agreement, the seller does not agree to compensate a buyer's broker. Seller understands that a buyer may include in the terms of any purchase agreement, a request that the seller agree to pay compensation to their buyer agent or to reimburse the buyer to allow the buyer to do so.
So in a situation, if you have a buyer, they say they absolutely will not pay your commission, it's gonna have to come from them. You call the agent and they're like, look, they've already told us they're absolutely not going to pay buyer's agent.
Yeah, so Rocky and I talked about that situation. He's gonna submit the offer anyways.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Because we want to see them decline it in writing. You know, and get that in paper and get it done, so that in the event that they're not selling their house. And they decide, well, maybe we need to pay a commission, they're gonna wanna go back to those who actually made offers instead of those who just called their agents.
So when you make that offer, are you asking for that compensation?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so then that's why they decline.
I don't want the listing agent telling me that their seller's gonna decline my offer based on commission.
Yes, 100% agree with that.
Cause the seller they can change their mind,
Right.
and they may
They
have
need to
said,
see it.
right, and when they had the conversation themselves at their listing appointment with that agent.
Mhm.
And that agent explained, you may get less offers, or you may not have as much traffic coming through because you're not offering it, at least the seller understands. And so now I'm sending you a purchase agreement that I was given to prove. There are people that are coming and they need to pay their agent and they don't have the money to do so.
Well, then it looks to your buyer too, like you still are working on their behalf, you're still trying to do.
Yeah.
Get them the house they want,
Yes.
but,
Yes, yeah, because you can't tell a buyer no.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they have options, and if their only option is that they have to go make an offer without an agent and buyer beware,
right.
that's the case.
Before they would write their own offer, they need to end their buyer's agreement with you.
Correct. Yeah,
I just want to make sure I understand. So if the seller's not offering, you're saying still write the offer anyway, check box 77 and have that addendum where it's saying we're asking for it. So the buyer knows, hey, you don't have to pay this if they
Yes.
if they're accepting that they're going to pay it. If they decline it, then we just move on.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, now, let's say this whole scenario we're talking about, that the seller wasn't paying compensation, right? And the buyer then asks through the purchase agreement that they do so, and the seller changes their mind and does. So the listing contract says 0 that the seller's paying the listing brokerage commission for a buyer's agent. So you do not, in this case, need a broker compensation agreement signed by me and the other managing broker. Because the agreement is not with the brokerages, the agreement is with between buyer and seller. And that was established in the purchase agreement that that both parties signed.
But isn't my commission coming from you as my brokerage?
Correct, yeah.
So then why
So
wouldn't
the
we
buy,
need
well,
both?
when you say buyer agent, it's assumed that it's the brokerage.
Gotcha.
Because it could be any KW agent being represented here. It's Keller Williams. But for ease of conversation with clients, we were referred to as licensees or agents. Or brokers. Okay, so let's talk about title company real quick. Please do not call the title company and give them the commission amount over the phone. The title companies should be receiving the commission in the form, notification in the form of contracts, period. Because there's been a rash of agents calling title companies and giving wrong information and nobody catching it until after closing, until after Alta statement, until after everything.
Oh.
I don't understand why it's happening, but it's happening. And it's unfortunate. So please make sure as a listing broker, if you're trying to establish title work in advance and you're asking the buyer's agents to do those sorts of things, make sure that you're sending your listing contract to the title company to help them understand how commission is being structured. If it changes through a purchase agreement, then they get the purchase agreement, but they also get the broker compensation agreement that shows the agreement between the brokers as far as how compensation is being handled. Because if it's confusing for the agents, it's definitely confusing for title companies. Like, where's this money coming from and how do I deduct it and which line item is that? And so we need to provide them as much information in writing. Phone calls are not. I mean, yeah, you can have a phone call conversation with a title rep, but I would follow it up with paperwork.
Okay, so when I'm sending documents to the lender.
And then also,
So,
Need the compensation agreement.
so if they would not need the broker compensation agreement. They would only need the purchase agreement, the BEAC.
BAC, okay, that's where I'm getting, okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what they would need from a buyer's agent is that.
So they know what their buyer's paying,
Yeah. Because the listing broker should be providing them the listing contract that establishes their commission rate. And how that's paid and how that's done on the line item. So that would be a debit off the seller to Keller Williams Realty Group. So you're gonna see debits from seller for KWRG. And then if a portion or all of the commission was also negotiated through the purchase agreement, then you're gonna see a line item from the seller to the buyer. And then the buyer is credited and then deducted because they're paying, guess who? Keller Williams Realty Group. Does that make sense?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, no wonder the title companies are going crazy. Okay, yeah. Speaking from someone who has done title,
Yeah.
that's.
So that's why I said you have to you guys have to talk these things out. We have script practice with Ben every morning.
And Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to 9:30, Tuesday, Thursday on Zoom, 3:30 to 4,
Yep, what he said.
every day.
Every day, what he said. So, and I know that Ben will accommodate what the hot topic of the day is too. So if it's just a matter of talking out scenarios with each other, call a friend, call an agent, come into the office, hang out for a while, talk to other agents, what would you do in this case? What would you do in this case? So, and we may follow this up with a mastermind in August or something, just now that we've had some time under our belt, we've had some contracts written and closed. what are we seeing in the field and, you know, how do we overcome this?
So the next team meeting is gonna be, of course, 2 weeks from yesterday, and my plan is to make it a mastermind around. What's the making, having these people sign the BEAC looking like? What are the conversations you're having to have, what are your objections? So we can get it out there, after about a month of having it, it looks like. It would be a good time to have a conversation, do you agree, Lee?
I think,
Probably start that team meeting at 1 o'clock instead of 11 o'clock. Because grand opening and vote.
yeah, so there were slight changes to the, purchase agreement for unimproved property. Seller concessions and buyer broker compensation lines were added to that. That's pretty much it for that one. And then there was some changes to commercial, purchase agreements as well to add those compensation lines.
Here's that on the listing contract 248. Did you see that? There's a new box. Seller is not offering seller concessions.
Yes. Yeah, we read that. No, it's all right. It's good. Oh, no, you know what? I didn't cover that one. Derek, thank you. So Derek saw two. This is for the listing contract for improved property. Line 248 is added. Seller is or is not offering seller concessions.
It's like another redundancy, right?
It is. These contracts,
Concessions.
that would be your bank. Yeah,
So not just commission,
Sure.
so,
So when we were seeing a lot of like the rate buy downs and things like
Right.
that.
so, or back when hey, we were asking them to pay 3%, of the purchase price towards the buyer's closing costs. So if they're willing to pay closing costs on top of that commission, you definitely need to mark that one.
I emailed these out to Ben earlier, so I'll have Ben mail these out to everybody.
Oh, with the highlighted, oh, perfect.
Okay. All right, well, that's it for the forms. Any more questions?
Wish it slow.
Yeah.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thank
Anybody
you.
online? You're welcome.
I don't know if you saw my question about emailing those, but you already said it, so that's perfect. I'd love the highlighted ones, so I know.
Yep. Okay, all right, well, everybody have a great rest of your day. And let's go make some money.
Thank you.
You're welcome.